644, code 3 in Champlin.
We've learned for the first time that State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark have been assassinated.
These were targeted shootings, assassinations of sitting lawmakers.
He doesn't deserve to have a name because that person almost killed my wife and my daughter and me.
It was 1 year ago Minnesotans found themselves confronting an unthinkable tragedy. State lawmakers targeted at their homes in an act of political violence. The suspect, Vance Belter, who was impersonating a police officer on the run for nearly 48 hours, sparking a nationwide manhunt. Thanks for joining us. I'm Julie Nelson. Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette were shot at their home in Champlin in the early morning hours of June 14th last year. Both survived. Shortly after, and just a few miles away, Speaker Emerita Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark were shot and killed at their Brooklyn Park home. The shootings led to calls across the country to tone down the political rhetoric, calls that Melissa Hortman herself echoed the last time she spoke to KARE 11, just 2 days before her death. But as time passed, did the tone of our political discourse actually change? Here's Rena Sargentopoulos.
The June 14th lawmaker shootings will be something every Minnesotan will remember.
It's kind of hard to think that it's truly been a year when some aspects of it seem like it was just yesterday.
But for obvious reasons,
it's been a hard year.
The political assassinations and attempts have changed the lives of those who served beside them.
I'm pretty close with John Hoffman. It's been hard to sort of watch him, but also inspiring to watch how resilient he's been, coming in every day to do his work, to resume the public service that he has the passion for.
And with that trauma in our past, I think many hoped the political tone would change too.
A few things occurred before we started session to really kind of show a little bit of unity, some humanity.
A moment of silence.
But then, of course, we had some other times where things would get heated.
You can be firm and assertive without being toxic or vitriolic.
That said, both senators agree the day-to-day bipartisan work isn't always what grabs the headlines. There were significant bills that made it through a tied House and a one-vote DFL margin in the Senate.
I think we just have to do a better job of policing ourselves.
We're opinion leaders, right? I mean, we're out in front when our words get replayed in the media.
Is it going to contribute to the overall good that we need in the environment that is going to be helpful to the state legislature to actually help us govern and do things that we need to across the aisle and for the folks here in Minnesota? And that can be a challenge. We're only human.
I think we all have a responsibility to reduce the toxicity of the rhetoric. And we'll all be better off, not just in our relations within the legislature or with our constituents, but as a community.
The Hortmans and their beloved dog Gilbert were mourned together in the weeks following the shooting, first at the state capitol, then in an emotional service with former President Joe Biden and former VP Kamala Harris in attendance. Our Kent Erdahl takes us there.
Throughout a funeral service filled with both Catholic tradition and the love of family, friends, and political leaders, one message about Mark and Melissa Hortman emerged.
There were two lights that guided their life: service and community.
Father Daniel Griffith told those in attendance and those streaming at home that despite their violent deaths, the Hortmans were instruments of peace.
Service and community are antidotes to our present afflictions as a state and as a nation.
We are buried in sorrow right now, but I do believe that we will experience joy again, and Mark and Melissa would not want it any other way.
Family friend Robin Ann Williams said the joy the couple brought to their community of friends, family, and neighbors was constant, and they did it while working hard for those they didn't always know.
Millions of Minnesotans get to live their lives better because she and Mark chose public service and politics.
Governor Walz, who served as a pallbearer, said Speaker Emerita Hortman will be remembered as the most consequential speaker in Minnesota history.
Her mission was to get as much good done for as many people as possible. It was the golden rule instilled to her by her father and the passion to serve she learned from her mother.
Passion and principle she and Mark in turn passed on to their own children.
Sophie and Colin, I know you've heard it countless times since June 14, but your parents adored you and were proud of you. The apples did not fall far from the trees.
That's something Colin Hortman himself made clear to all who watched.
Melissa and Mark embodied the golden rule. The prayer that captures this essence was held in Melissa's wallet. It never left her side. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace.
All of us are searching for some kind of meaning, some kind of lesson that we can learn to help ease our loss. And maybe it is this moment, a moment when each of us can recommit to engaging in politics and life the way Mark and Melissa did. Fiercely, enthusiastically, heartily, but without ever losing sight of our common humanity.
May their memory always be a blessing, and may they rest in peace.
You just heard from Colin Hortman speaking at his parents' funeral last year. But for the Hortman children, the grief and trauma of losing their parents was followed by a battle to turn a crime scene back into a home. Jana Shortle spoke with Colin this spring.
Going back to Windsor Terrace for the first time took a few days for Colin Hortman.
So seeing it all boarded up, and we were walking inside, and seeing like burn marks on tile, just very odd from like all the dispersionary devices that they used after the crime. It's just, the bullet holes in the drywall, so very difficult.
You grew up in that house?
Yeah, it was my childhood home.
His childhood home was unrecognizable. It was a crime scene, and like all crime scenes, it had to be cleaned up, and that's when a battle began.
The homeowner's insurance was really great. They were over the top with everything, but the city's insurance fought really hard to try to get the cost of cleaning way down. They wanted a very basic cleaning of the house.
A basic cleaning was not going to cut it. Colin knew that because he and his sister hired remediation specialists to look at the damage. The specialist Colin says the BCA recommended because of the amount of damage inside. Damage he says he understands the officers there that night had to do.
When the cops thought that he was still in there, then for public safety and for their own safety, they used tear gas and smoke grenades and flashbangs. And so there's like a chemical residue that's left behind. And they put those in every single room because they were, like swatted the house, essentially.
But for 8 months, Collins said the insurance company for Brooklyn Park wouldn't budge. They didn't want to pay for the major cleanup. So Colin put on his Hortman hat.
There were things that I wanted to do there as part of my grieving and healing process.
He went to his mother's second home, the Capitol, and he testified with his story to fight for 2 bills that would tweak state law to make it clear what insurance has to pay for when law enforcement damages a home, and to make it plain that law enforcement has to tell a family what chemicals it used and how much in that house, so insurance companies know upfront exactly what they are paying to fix.
I just felt very compelled to fix it.
Fix the laws so no one has to go through what he did.
I grew up in it, so there's so much happiness in that house. I think it's really easy to focus on 30 seconds. But there's 30 years of really beautiful, peaceful, loving memories. And so we've been using the phrase, it's both unsettling and comforting at the same time. And I think that's very, that's how grief and trauma are.
Colin Hortman is not the only one opening up about the tragedy in the last year. When we come back, State Senator John Hoffman tells us in his own words what happened that night and how time seemed to slow. Plus, as we mark 1 year since the Lawmaker shootings, an unexpected turn of events in Vance Belter's case. State Senator John Hoffman returned to work at the Capitol this January, just 6 months after surviving an attempted assassination. And shortly after that, he shared his story for the first time with our Jana Shortle, telling her he had fallen asleep watching TV and was awakened early in the morning by banging on his door. That moment would be the beginning of a horrific day of political violence.
644, code 3 in Champlin.
You want to go back to June of last year?
Yeah, we can. I was just sitting there in my green chair, and I fell asleep, like you do when you're, and Yvette, she went upstairs and, she was upstairs sleeping. I was in my green chair, and at 2 a.m., all of a sudden, bam, 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 I hear this pounding, and I could see red and blue lights outside my window, and, open up, it's the police. And I'm like, what the hell? And I, dummy me, I opened the door, flashlight in my eye, and starts quizzing me on who's in the house. And I could see the car with the lights, but he had a very heavy flashlight in my eyes. He finally, after he was pointing the gun to my daughter, I looked and I could see the mask, and I said, "You're not a cop." And I slammed the door on him. First bullet, then he started shooting, and all I heard was pop, 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 pop. And then the time slowed down, Jana. One bullet I saw come through the door actually hit me here. This one was 2 millimeters from my heart. Then this one was also close. This one's still inside me, but this one went down and out my flank. I'm looking in disbelief, like, what's going on? I then fell down after, 9 bullets. 10 if you count this one as I was falling backwards. And then Yvette went over on top of me, and she starts pushing on the guy. And, she shot twice here and 6 times here, but she got the door shut. And then last thing I remember was the nurse, the ER nurse, when I said, "Take us to Mercy," and her face got right in front of my face, and she said, "We got you, Johnny."
Senator Hoffman then woke up days later, foggy, but he knew he had been shot and that he was still alive. He was told his friends, Mark and Melissa Hortman, who he had dinner with just hours before the shootings, were dead. Then he was told who is accused of trying to kill him.
Do you think about Vance Belter?
No, I don't say his name. He doesn't deserve to have a name, because that person almost killed my wife and my daughter and me, and he killed 2 dear friends of mine.
Senator Hoffman hasn't lived a minute since June 14th without thinking of the Hortmans, especially Melissa.
Melissa, who, as she was arguing with me about one thing, she said, "I'm kind of like that little kid sister that you can't get rid of, She was my little kid political sister. But boy, what a fierce advocate. Absolutely a fierce advocate. That's the thing we can't forget.
Part of Senator Hoffman's vow to not forget is to stay in office and run for office again. And he's mindful that he's doing so in the here and now of Minnesota, where once again, a shooting has drawn the nation's eyes to our state.
The young woman who was shot in Minneapolis, the sound of that gun was a 9mm sound, the same sound that I heard. That all has a triggering effect. In this world of healing, I'm supposed to be healing and recovering, and I'm recovering. And recovering isn't a linear thing, Jana. It's moment by moment. You have your good days, you have your great days, you have your not so good days, right?
Doesn't it ever get to be too much?
Oh, absolutely. And then I'm at a crossroad. Do I withdraw or do I keep engaged?
Purpose becomes clearer.
100%. It's not about me. It's about what we do collectively. Does that make sense?
We head to rural Sibley County next to hear from the neighbor who spotted Belter, eventually bringing an end to the nearly 48-hour manhunt.
Once I realized that there was no other people here and there was no other vehicles, I started freaking out. Never would I have thought he was here.
Vance Belter faces federal and state charges, accused of carrying out the targeted attacks on the Hortmans and the Hoffmans. And he allegedly planned to do more harm, with prosecutors saying they recovered a handwritten list of names of public officials inside his vehicle. This week, a stunning turn of events in the case, with Belter agreeing to plead guilty in his federal case. And in return, the death penalty is off the table. Lou Raguse was in the courtroom as the plea was entered, and heartbreaking new details came to light.
In front of a packed federal courtroom gallery, the man who terrorized Minnesota 1 year ago, carrying out a political assassination, then leading police on a manhunt, admitted to his crimes. Vance Belter agreed to a plea deal that will force him to serve back-to-back life sentences for the murders of State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark, their grown children, in the court for the hearing. An additional 40 years added to the life sentences account for Belter's stalking and attempted assassination of State Senator John Hoffman and his family. As new details from the crimes were read in court, Hortman friends and family cried out when it was revealed Belter chased her in the house and shot her with a gun pressed to her head.
Political violence is a scourge plaguing America in our times.
U.S. Attorney Daniel Rosen says they would have pursued the death penalty had Belter not agreed to the life sentences in the plea deal.
The terms of our offer to Mr. Belter were, if you plead guilty and take consecutive life sentences, we will take the death penalty off the table.
The plea spares the Hortman and Hoffman families from a trial where Belter might have repeated his public claims of being recruited as an assassin by the governor. In court, he spouted no such conspiracies, instead admitting to each element of the crimes that the evidence pointed toward. That Belter impersonated an officer and wore a latex mask after planning the murders for months in advance alone. That he told the Hoffmans that there had been a shooting and he needed to know if they had any guns before he opened fire on them. That he intended to kill 2 other lawmakers who he was not able to find when he went to their homes. And that he told Mark Hortman he was doing a welfare check and needed to see Melissa before he shot them both.
I wonder if, any of us who live law-abiding lives will ever really be able to understand that sort of motivation.
Nearly 48 hours passed between the shootings early in the morning of June 14th to the time Vance Belter was captured, found in a field not far from his home in Green Isle, a small town in Sibley County. The manhunt was the largest in Minnesota history and garnered national attention. But it was a neighbor who spotted him, and she spoke to our Joe McCoy the next day.
The 43-hour manhunt for Vance Belter ended in one fateful moment.
Well, it had to have been about 8 o'clock when I saw him.
Wendy Thomas came to her neighbor Kevin Effort's home to get an address book about 1.7 miles away from Belter's home. As she was pulling out of the driveway, she saw who everyone had been looking for.
He was walking in this grass, and once I realized that there was no other people here and there was no other vehicles, I started freaking out.
Thomas said Belter then crouched down, and she raced down the driveway to alert police.
Never would I have thought he was here. I'm still processing it. I'm shocked that it was him. I'm shocked that it all panned out the way that it did.
A lot of my friends here were really nervous about what was going on.
Kevin Efforts owns this property where Belter was found. From the sky, you can see the path Belter took as law enforcement says he crawled to them before being arrested.
And you can see where he crawled through, and they brought him out right here. And actually there's water down in there, so he was crawling through the water.
Efforts and Thomas,
he was walking down,
both knew Belter and his family.
He was always pretty friendly.
Efforts says he had done handyman jobs for them.
He worked a lot. He told me that he worked for a couple companies, had a lot of different jobs. I just couldn't believe that he would do something like this.
This path in the meadow will hopefully be the start of the path to justice, as the small town of Green Isle may forever be changed by these 43 hours and one moment.
I would say most people out here don't even have to ever worry about locking their doors because everybody watches out for everybody. And now that'll change, I'm sure.
Wendy told us she felt there would be no chance Belter was still in Green Isle. In fact, when she first spotted him, she thought he was part of the search team. But when she realized he was alone, she says that is when she knew it was most likely Belter. We'll be right back. A Minnesota organization honored the Hortman family in the past year by paying tribute to their dog, Gilbert, who was also shot and killed that night. The Hortmans met Gilbert through Helping Paws, an organization that trains and places service dogs. Gilbert actually failed that program, but the Golden Retriever became a beloved companion to the couple. Helping Paws brought Gilbert's litter mates to greet mourners at the Capitol. And later in the summer, the group formed the Hortman Heroes Fund to help pay for more service dogs to help veterans, first responders, and people struggling with PTSD. Gilbert's legacy lives on through Helping Paws. Melissa's lives on in many ways, one of them at the state capitol. and not just inside the Capitol building.
The state capitol is a place where friendships bloom.
I got to know Melissa. I was first elected in 2018.
Representative Brad Tabke clicked with Hortman over their mutual love of landscaping.
Sharing pictures with what's blooming in our yards at the time and what we planted. And
Hortman sent Tabke photos of her lilac tree, and Tabke returned the favor.
The most recent thing that I had sent her a picture about was we put a frog pond in our backyard and for my kids, and so she was very excited about the frog pond.
They also worked on environmental issues at the legislature.
A lot on making sure to share that love of trees and nature throughout the state, and committed to helping to make that happen.
That includes a spending bill in 2023 that funded a Capitol Mall redesign project and 180 new trees around the Capitol complex. A few dozen of those trees have already been planted, thanks to Hortman's guidance.
Everything that is through here that we can see off to my right, your left, those are all Melissa's trees. Those are all ones that she advocated for and worked really hard to get funding for in our 2023 bill.
Tabke said Hortman's goal was to have the Capitol Mall covered with trees for generations.
There's an old adage that the best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago, and the second best time is today. And so this is what she is doing for all of us.
A 2023 environment bill that Hortman helped pass also included millions of dollars for new trees across Minnesota.
We will plant millions and millions of trees across the state of Minnesota in her name and in her honor, and make sure that we're doing it right.
A year has passed, but for many, the memories remain vivid. The pain, the fear, and the questions from that day that still linger. But so does something else, the resilience of a state that refuses to let tragedy define it. Today, we remember the lives forever changed, the public servants who were targeted, and the communities that found strength in one another when they needed it most.